You're listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses. Each week, you'll hear my thought-provoking conversations with Olympians, pro athletes, CEOs, elite coaches, best-selling authors, and other high performers to uncover their secrets to success. Get ready to be inspired each week when we talk about leadership, teamwork, work ethic, and more. Are you ready? Let's go. Hi, everyone. This week, my guest is #1 New York Times bestselling author, Mark Sullivan. Mark is the acclaimed author of 18 novels, including the #1 New York Times bestselling series, Private, which he writes with legendary novelist James Patterson. Mark is also the author of #1 bestseller, Beneath a Scarlet Sky, a novel based upon the true story of Pino Lella, an Italian teen who heroically rescued Jews from the Nazis during World War II. Mark's works have been named a New York Times notable book and LA Times Best Book of the Year. He is also an avid skier and adventurer. I'm also joined this week by my friend Nathan Baugh, who I asked to join me as a special guest co-host for my conversation with Mark. Nathan studies the world's best storytellers and tweets about it to over 200,000 people every single day. He also writes World Builders, an email newsletter about storytelling, which he sends to over 50,000 people every week. I thought Nathan would be the perfect person to help me uncover the success secrets of an all-time great novelist like Mark Sullivan. Nathan and I asked Mark for a deep, behind-the-scenes look at his creative process, what he's learned collaborating with James Patterson, and so much more. In our conversation, you'll hear practical lessons on maximizing your creativity, organizing your ideas, finding your voice, and how to become a more powerful storyteller. I am a big believer that storytelling is one of life's most important skills. All of us can benefit from developing our craft as storytellers. It can help you in your career, creative work, and everyday life. I really enjoyed the conversation that Nathan and I had with Mark, and I hope it helps you make the most of big ideas and opportunities in your own life. So, let's pull the tarp and get straight to best-selling author Mark Sullivan. Mark, where I want to begin, I want to go way back. I have read that you have said that the best job that you've ever had was selling souvenirs at Fenway Park during your high school summers. I'm curious, what was it about that experience that gave you so much joy and such great memories to this day?
I started doing it when I was 13, and up till that point, I'd lived in a small suburban town outside of Boston. And all of a sudden, this kid who became one of my closest friends asked me if I wanted to go work at Fenway for his uncles. And I said, sure. And my dad was all over it because my father's a big Red Sox fan. And in I go. And it was a massive, massive life lesson. You know, I didn't work in the park. I worked right in the streets outside the park. I had my own cart where I sold souvenirs. And the first night I was out there, I was in the bleachers, and this was Friday night. Back in those days, they could drink right through the ninth inning. People would come out slammed and steal everything. And I got stolen, and I didn't know what to do because I came back owing money. And I said, what do I do? And my friend gave me one of those little $1.50 baseball bats. And he said, if they try to steal something, just hit them in the knuckles. And I said, well, what if they're bigger than me and they get really mad? And he goes, then pick up the bigger baseball bat and act like you're insane. And I did, and it worked. And I fell in love with the whole thing. So it was just awesome. I mean, I get to go into all these games constantly. I would buy scalp tickets, and all of a sudden I'd be sitting right in back of the dugout. We worked before the game, and then we worked from the seventh inning on.
I absolutely love that story, Mark. And as you know, this podcast is called Everybody Pulls the Tarp, and it's all connected back to a summer I spent interning in minor league baseball, where I pulled the tarp with the grounds crew, but I also set up moon bounces, dressed as the mascot, drove player spouses to their condo complexes, sold merchandise. And I still tell people to this day, it has been one of the best life experiences and career experiences that I've ever had, because I got to interact with people, learn customer service, and learn to just do whatever it takes to make a difference. Nathan, why don't you get us rolling on some of the questions around Mark's journey as a novelist?
Yeah, Mark, I first big fan of your work. You have some fantastic books out there. Talking about your childhood kind of in and around Boston, I'm curious if there was a point or several moments in time that you remember where you started to think, I have this kind of creative streak in me. What what might that become? What got you interested in writing, and then
Sure.
kind of moving into being an author?
Well, the big thing right off the bat was my mother. We didn't have television until I was 10. So it was all about books. And my mother taught me to read when I was 4. She just had me in her lap and she just taught me to read. And I could read when I showed up in school. So that was a help. And then in second grade, I went to a parochial school in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We lived down there for about 3.5, 4 years when I was a kid. And I got in a fist fight in the hall. And all of a sudden, this 6-foot, 200-pound penguin literally picks me up. And she's the school vice principal and the disciplinarian. And she's also my mother's best friend. So this is a real problem. And this is back when they could hit you with rulers across the knuckles or in your ass or whatever. So I figured I was in for it. And instead, she said, Mark Sullivan, your punishment is you will go home and write a short story to enter in the grades 1 through 8 short story writing contest. And I went, what? But I was psyched because I wasn't getting spanked, right? So I go home and I figured for sure she had called my mother. Nope. And I'm the kid who always went outside after school. I was antsy all the time sitting in a chair. And I go upstairs. I tell my mother I'm going up to write something for school. I go up, I sit down, I have no clue, right? Classic writer's block. And I just I got to find something. And all of a sudden, a cottontail rabbit went burning through our backyard, goes across the street with a beagle right behind it, and they disappear into this cornfield on this farm across the street. And I went, okay, because I used to play in the farm all the time, and I just wrote this story about this rabbit getting chased by a beagle in the farm right next to my house. And turned it in, forgot about it. 2 weeks later, my parents get pulled into the principal's office, and they're sitting there, 2 big nuns, and they slide this paper across to my parents and they say, which one of you wrote it? And my father looks down and my mother, we've never seen this before. What is it? And they said, it's the winning entry in the grades 1 through 8 short story writing contest. And I had to read it in front of the school and everybody cheered. And I went, okay. And there was just a number of incidents like that, in the next 10 years or so of my life, culminating with I had an amazing English teacher when I was a sophomore in high school. She was about 4'8". She went to Brandeis. She had a master's degree in English, and she had worked at Hart Corporation Jovanovich, the big publishing company that was then in Boston. And she pulled me aside at the end of sophomore year, and she said, if you really applied yourself, you could be a professional writer. And that was huge. And then she wrote all my recommendations to college. And I had no business getting in there because my grades were just sort of okay. But it was her recommendation that got me into Hamilton College, which is a school that's known for writing. You can't go to school there unless you can write, or come out of it unless you can write. And it just snowballed, right? There were all these events that kind of just clicked into place to get me here.
I love how your stories include fistfights or hitting people with baseball bats. That's great.
I know. It's a world of violence.
It's so neat how just simple little actions of a teacher or multiple teachers in this case can really chart a unique path for someone. They obviously saw something in you, which is really neat. So I'm curious, Mark. So you served in the Peace Corps in West Africa. You returned to the U.S., got a graduate degree then in journalism at Northwestern. And then you go to an investigative journalism career. What drew you to investigative journalism early on in your career? And what did you take away from that experience most?
I just got an opportunity very young. I was working in Washington, D.C. as a reporter at a place that's now defunct. It was called States News Service. And they used to call us the boat people of American journalism because we served as backup reporters for all these newspapers around the country. And I got on to a big Ponzi scheme that was going on that had ensnared a lot of celebrities. And because I understood how the Securities and Exchange Commission worked, I was able to go in there and start pulling documents and put together a story that no one else had. And it ended up running in the New York Times, and I was off and going pretty much.
That's fantastic. And I'm curious, I mean, like, were there specific skills that you developed or that you honed in that period of time?
Yeah, I mean, I learned to be very comfortable with documents and to go and look for primary sources. I was also very comfortable at working at odd hours, right? I mean, investigative reporting, you don't go to see the mayor when they're in their office, their power place. You go to see the mayor when they're walking out of their house, right? When they're like disarmed. And I learned a lot of those kinds of things because I had some pretty amazing partners who taught me a lot. A guy, one of my friends ended up winning the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. And he just taught me a tremendous amount over the years. And it was all the power of legwork. Are you willing to get out of your office and get off the phone and go and knock on doors? Because people just interact with you differently one-on-one than they do, on the phone or even on Zoom. They just do.
I've spoken with a few authors who had previous careers in journalism, and some of them say it helped them quite a bit. And then some of them actually say that they don't think the skills translated as much as they might have expected. I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are, and if you've seen different things you learned in journalism transfer.
I think the research translates. What I don't think is the writing skills translate. You have to learn a new way of writing to write fiction and to write than you do for nonfiction. You're just in a different situation. You have to learn to trust the power of voice when you're writing fiction. And if you're any good at journalism, you just trust the power of voice, right? The ideal journalism piece for me has always been where you don't even know there's a writer, right? It's just like you're into that, the flow of it, and there are no biases. You can tell that the person's writing it right down the middle. With fiction, it's a totally different thing. If there's no voice, if there's no authenticity on the page of the way the storyteller's telling it, then it fails, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I open every book wanting to fall in love with the way it's told. And that's the big deal. Now, great journalism can have great storytelling too. But, as Gabriel Garcia Marquez said, if you fake one fact in a piece of journalism, it makes the whole thing a failure. If there's one piece of truth in a piece of fiction, it's a success. It's a different way of thinking about it. But again and again, it goes back to the voice. Who am I hearing? Who's telling the story? Does the writer have such control over the narrator, whether it's third person or first person, to make it so convincing that the reader just falls away into a new world? And that's what I'm after all the time. I'm after creating a transportive experience for the reader.
Mark, is that something, in finding that voice, is that something that's come easier to you over time as you've moved along in your career, or is it something that you're constantly battling?
I don't battle anymore writing. I don't battle at all. I used to battle all the time. Now I come in and I've been at this for 30 plus years. And where before I would constantly analyze what I was doing, now I just trust. I go in, I understand the story, I understand the facts. I've written a monster outline. My outlines can long as 200 pages. But once I get the outline done, I rarely refer to it. Right? I know the outline so well that when I'm actually writing, I'm like, okay, this is the scene. Or I might look and say, all right, I'm writing this scene. But I know the scene, right? And I'm seeing it in my head by this point. Somebody asked me once, are you a planner or a channeler? And I say both, right? I plan, but once I'm writing, I channel the story. I channel that voice. That's what I'm after. And with the historical fiction, I'm trying to write in a way that puts the reader right here on the shoulder of the main characters so that they experience what the characters do. If I can do that, I got them. I got them.
That was one of my favorite parts of Beneath the Starlit Sky, was just being so close to Pino. It felt like you understood the character so well. I read that you spent quite a bit of time actually with him, and I'm sure some of that was understanding the story, what happened, being able to shape that. But how much of that time did you really focus on getting to know him and his voice so that you could take that and then translate it to the character in the book?
That wasn't hard. The guy was massive, charismatic character. I mean, I come off the plane the first time I meet him, and he's there to meet me at Malpensa in Milan. And he's a big guy, he's like 6'1", even when he was in his late 70s. And he was in Alpini, that's what they call them. These guys in northern Italy, they climb around the mountains and they're strong. And he had big hands. And we go outside, and he's very gregarious. He comes in, wants everything is about you. That's just his personality. And then we go out and we get in this little Citroën de Chevaux, which is kind of even more underpowered than ordinarily underpowered to a Bug, VW Bug. And he proceeds to drive the thing like a Ferrari through the streets of Italy. I mean, and I knew nothing about the driving aspect of the story at this point. I was completely blown away by the guy's capacity to drive an automobile. And of course, that becomes absolutely critical that you understand that he can do this stuff and did do this stuff. And amazing driver. And I lived in his house. I lived upstairs for that first 3 weeks, and we were together nonstop from dawn till dusk and into the evening. We would talk the story, but he was also intent on talking about his life and stuff. And I learned a lot from him. I mean, I went to Italy to meet him, and I had been pretty much a crushed person. And I got there, and he made me understand not only a different way to look at grief, because I was suffering from the death of my younger brother at the time, but he also gave me a new way of looking at the world, that we never know who's coming in or out of our life on a daily basis. The key is to have gratitude for them while they're there. And this shift in perspective was a whole massive change in my life and has led me every step of the way since. So
I'm curious.
Very distinctive voice,
That's incredible. I'm not surprised the book turned out as well as it did after hearing your story of your time you spent with him.
Yeah, great guy.
I'm curious, Mark, when do you make the decision that it's going to be historical fiction and based on a true story as opposed to a nonfiction book? Like, at what point does that decision get made, and how did you go through that process?
Yeah, so with Beneath the Scarlet Sky, my intention right off the bat was to write it like Unbroken, right? Laurie Hildebrands' masterpiece about Zamperini. And she was really lucky in a way that I wasn't, right? As soon as the war ends and he's still in a prison camp, the army sends in all these judge advocate generals to start gathering evidence for war crimes prosecutions. And those depositions are all part of the public record. They're all there. And Zamperini also, the story benefited because the guy who was the co-pilot on the bomber that he was in when they crashed was still alive and was able to corroborate a lot of what Zamperini described. Remember when they go into the water and they're in that life raft for like 20-something days. So she had all that. And most of the people, by the time I got to the story, were dead, except for Pino and a few others. I had a guy, Giuliano Cernatori, who's dead now, but he went with us up to Casalpina because he was there at the same time Pino was, and he was able to corroborate a lot of the things that, Pino had described. So with Cernatori and these kind of people giving me the background to understand it, I thought I was going to be able to do it, right? But as I kept going, there were obvious gaps in the stories, right? So I didn't know them. And anyway, like 4 or 5 years into this process, and again, I'm not writing this full time. This is my passion project. Every time I write something that raises enough money, I go back to Europe, and I'm either in Italy or Germany or in England to study the bombing campaigns or what have you. But I'm frustrated like 5 years into that process. And I run into this woman who is an agent, a literary agent that I've known for years, but she's not my agent. I run into her at a cocktail party and publishing party in New York, and I tell her what's going on. And she said, well, Mark, if this had come to you 15 or 20 years ago when you were a journalist, I would say, tough. There's some stories you're never going to get in their totality. But she said, the story didn't come to a journalist. It came to a talented novelist. And I think you should tell the story as a novel. And I struggled with that back and forth. But once I committed to the idea that I was going to give the reader the same kind of emotional arc that I went through hearing it for the first time, then I could feel the power of it. I could feel it coming through. And, I found that there's just certain things that the nonfiction writer cannot do. And there's only so close that you can take them, the reader, to having them sitting right there, right? Because you're always citing sources versus this is what happened. This is happening in real time. And I think that's one of the powers of Beneath the Scarlet Sky. It hits you as if you experienced it.
It does. It reminds me of what you said earlier, where you were talking about how fiction, there's going to be that one truth. Mm-hmm. And you get that, and it carries the entire story.
That's right. And I believe that's correct. It's subsequent. I mean, I've done it 2 times more. And it works the same way, which is nice.
I'm very curious because you've had a very long career as an author and you've put out so many different books. What from book, 1 through 3 or 1 through 5 to now, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen within your own writing, whether it's the process, the output, or things you used to focus on that you don't focus on as much now, vice versa?
I used to focus on productivity. I mean, like crazily, because first of all, I came out of a deadline world, right? I always had a deadline in journalism, and I believe they're very, very good for writers. Otherwise, you can become a procrastinator, and that's the disaster. You want to get to it. So I would say the first 1 through 3, maybe 1, 2, it was all about production, getting one done. The first one I wrote while I was still in journalism. I wrote it in the mornings and on the weekends, and I took a leave of absence to work on it. I quit journalism before the second one, worked on it, wrote it, sold them both a year into my, quote, retirement from journalism. Certainly wasn't enough to make a living, but it was okay because I was starting to make a career as a magazine writer. And I did that. And then the third book, I took a chance and I flipped everything on its head, and I wrote in the voice of a woman with a purification ceremony. And that blew up. And it just hit a nerve that I didn't expect. I mean, it's a story about a woman tracking deer hunter. But it really resonated because I told it in her voice. And I could hear her. I could hear her speaking right through the back of my head when I wrote it. What's interesting is that in the past about 5 years, I go to India a lot. I study in ashrams and stuff and with monks. And they've made me realize that, remember I told you this story about my very first writing foray and why. They made me see in a way that I'd never seen before that since then, the whole idea of productivity and having multiple deadlines was part and parcel of a punishment. I was told to write a short story as punishment. Mm-hmm. And they made me see that a lot of times when I would go to work, I would just get really freaking like I'm going in there and writing. And they made me understand that writing could come from a place of joy, not punishment. And that has been in the last 2 books. And oh man, what a difference. I don't go to work in any kind of state other than joy because I'm getting to do my art. What a gift that I get to do this all the time, right? Every day you could get up and go, oh, I got to write 20 pages or 10 pages or what have you. And now I go, I get to do this. This is insane. I get to live on the side of Big Sky Mountain in the winter.
Yeah.
I ski off my front porch. I ski back on, and then I go to work. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I am forever grateful, and I don't take it for granted at all. But that's been the big difference. It's gone from a state of learning to the point where I was a journeyman. And then I was really good at it, but I realized that it was a form of, I was deep down, it was a form of punishment. And now I write from a totally different place. Yeah.
So what does that look like? Like paint that picture, Mark, like when you're stepping into work, which for you is performing an art now, what does that look like? I mean, paint that picture for us. What does it look like?
I get up every morning, roughly around 6:30. I'm an early riser. After I take my bulldog for a walk, I meditate. I found that of all the things any artist can do, and I coach, other artists in this kind of things because I believe that writers, for one reason or another, get in a self-destructive phase, and there are ways to have a long, productive career if you just know them, right? They're not secrets. You just got to know them and practice them. So first thing I do is I meditate, usually somewhere between 15 and 25 minutes. Then I work out, some kind of, if we're in Bozeman, I have a gym in my basement. If I'm up here, I have like a TRX system, and I use it just to get stretched out. And then in Bozeman, I go right to work. And here I ski for an hour and a half. It's one of my passions in life. And I'd rather ski first thing than last thing. So I do it maybe 4 days a week, 5 days a week. I'll do it. And then I'm here by 11 and I write from 11 to 5. And the meditation calms my brain enough that I know what's coming. And again, I don't go into it in a sense of angst. I go into it like, goody, right? This is going to be fun because I get to write this scene or that scene. And I know in my heart what the impact of that scene is going to be. And that gets me excited, right? Then when I go to work, it's not out of like, how am I going to do this? It's like, buddy, you've got all the skills. You've been at this for 35 years. If you don't have the skills, something's wrong. But you do have the skills. So just relax and bring them to bear and go. And that's how I do it.
Before we started recording, you mentioned how to prepare for skiing, you would look at the mountain the night before.
Yeah.
And that tells you where you want to go the next day.
Sure.
It sounds like you may have a similar routine with writing where you have your morning time that's pretty consistent each day and that builds up to the point where you're excited to sit in the chair, get your hands on the keyboard. I'm curious, is there anything else that you do before writing that prepares you for it, maybe the night before or that morning specifically?
The first thing I do when I get in there is I read what I wrote the day before and I edit it. And a lot of this stuff came from, I used to read like the Paris Review interviews with writers who I really respected. And almost all of them talked about, editing what came the day before, but not going back to the beginning. Don't ever do that. That's the mark of a beginning novelist or book writer is they keep churning the first 100 pages, right? It's like, no, get to the end. That's the difference between a neophyte and a veteran. The veteran finishes. The neophyte churns. But when I go in, I edit first, and then I'm in flow. And I do have an outline. So I know where I'm going. And I usually follow Hemingway's prescription to always stop where you know exactly where you're going next. And so it's been ruminating in there. And very often it'll be when I'm not writing that I'm off doing something else, walking the dogs or skiing or doing what have you. And all of a sudden, bing, there's the light bulb. That's what's wrong with that scene, right? And I make space for that all the time because writing is a process. It's iteration upon iteration upon iteration. And unless you're comfortable with that, this long marathon-like process, you're probably not meant to do it. Half the things with the meditation and the workout with me, I described myself in second grade parochial school as being antsy right in my chair. I'm still antsy in my chair. I like walking around doing stuff. This doesn't come naturally to me. But I've put in place systems that allow me to burn off energy, burn off mental energy, so that I can come to my art in a very calm and relaxed state. Because I think that's where the best stuff comes. Either that or higher.
This is so great, Mark. I mean, I know Nathan and I are learning a ton. As we wrap up our conversation, and I could ask you questions for hours, Mark, and I know Nathan could do the same. But as we think about wrapping up this conversation, if you had to distill it down to one thing, what do you think is the one thing that's been most impactful on your success and your longevity as a writer?
I never gave up. I mean, there were all sorts of times where I could have just tossed it because there were times where, frankly, I was disgusted with it. I thought, and I knew I was a high caliber writer. I knew it. I mean, I had been reading since I was 4 and I was reading what was going way up on the bestseller list. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I can write circles around these people. And I'm not being an asshole saying that. I just knew it. Sometimes you just know. And it was mostly that knowing and frankly, my wife's knowing and belief in it. My wife's a huge reader and, she would read usually the second draft of something. I never show anybody my first drafts, but she would read the second draft and she was like, this is way better than something that I'm reading that's supposed to be in draft 6. So that was a frustration. But now I all see it as everything that I went through writing prepared me for where I am, which is I'm 64 years old. I have no intention of retiring. I love doing what I do. I have a ridiculously fun life outside of writing and in writing. I just spent the past 3 years writing a book that's based in Uganda. And it's every day that I went to work, I was disappearing through the screen into northern Uganda and South Sudan. And I mean, who gets to do that for a living? You know, I do.
I'm excited to read it.
It's so cool, Mark, and I'm excited to read it as well. And I just think that's such a fantastic message that you just shared for us to end on, right? I mean, you kept going. You kept working. You kept going at times when you could have given up. And you also, as you mentioned, had your wife as a supporter who said, keep going. And I think that's so critical to a lot of individual success is somebody or multiple people around you that tell you to keep going and give you that nudge when you need it.
And I did. And I also had the professional miracle happen that James Patterson took a huge interest in my writing and said, keep going. And not only that, I'm going to work with you. And again, when I went to work with him, I thought I knew a lot about writing commercial fiction. Now it was like studying with Yoda all the time. It was that kind of level of mastering lessons from him, and can't thank the guy enough.
Yeah. I know we're wrapping up here, but I want to dig in on that a little bit because, James is a legend when it comes to writing and storytelling. Those first, however long you spent with him, what were some of 2 or 3 really key takeaways, whether it's about writing itself or his process or what he taught you?
Sure. He taught me a few things. One was the power of outlines. He just said, you don't understand, it's going to set you free. And he was right. It set me free when I'm actually sitting down to write. To understand the structure of the thing to begin with is awesome. The second thing was he always told me to imagine yourself sitting at a bar and you turn to someone to your right and you just start telling them the story. And the other thing is he taught me is that we're imperfect. We're always going to be imperfect, but we're trying to be terrific.
It's really well said.
That's incredible. We're imperfect, but we're trying to be
terrific.
Great. Terrific. We're imperfect, but we're trying to be terrific.
That's right.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's powerful. Nathan, I'm so glad that you asked that question and we put a pin in that a little bit because I was particularly curious as I've kind of studied the arc of your career, Mark, and how that all kind of came together. And you said you called it a career miracle or something to that effect.
Yeah.
It's funny when I think about miracles and people talk about they get lucky. I think people get lucky and things happen when you work hard and you take a lot of chances and you put yourself out there. And yes, it takes a little bit of luck and you got to catch a few breaks here and there. But I got to believe that your work and just the amount of reps and time you stuck with it put so much in that you created an opportunity for yourself to work with James.
I guess he had read my book. So yes, I put forth the effort and he liked the way I write. And then when we met for the first time and sat down and talked, we thought about writing the same way, that it was something, it was an art, it was a practice, it was something you did every day. When I'm writing, I write every day. When I'm not writing, I don't write at all. I don't think about it. I go off and go bow hunting or skiing or, traveling or what have you. But he also taught me, this is very important. He said, most Americans know how to work hard and they know how to play hard, but they don't know how to rest hard. He said, you're going to have to learn how to rest hard to keep pace to stay in a career for a long time. And so the skiing is part of resting hard. It's my relaxation. Patterson gets up in the morning, works, and then goes, plays 9 holes of golf and comes back and works till dinner. That's his rest hard right there and play hard.
It's fascinating. And I just keep being drawn back to the work ethic that you have and the process and the systems that you've built, but also the people around you that have played a role in your success and, things that some would call serendipitous, some would call just putting in the work. I think they came together and continue to come together in just phenomenal ways for you. This has been so much fun, Mark. I know, like I said a few minutes ago, I could ask you questions all day, but This has been great. I have learned a ton. Keep pulling the tarp, as I like to say, just like you were at Fenway Park, and now that you do for so many millions who read your work every single day. Thank you for pulling the tarp, and thank you for spending a few minutes with Nathan and I this week.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Twitter at Andrew H. Moses. That's Andrew H. Moses. And be sure to sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today is a great day to pull the tarp. I am rooting for you. See you next time.